Welcome back to the Paranormal Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. By a show of hands, who here has lived in a haunted house? Okay, quite a few of you out there. Who here has lived in that house for over a decade because you couldn't afford to leave? A few of you still. All right, let's up the ante. Who here has lived a haunted life? Run through crowds of shadow people, stared into the glowing eyes of tall, cryptic creatures, been yanked from bed by an unseen force, and lived to tell the tale. Today's guest has. Not only has he lived to tell the tale, he has put that tale to page and joins us today to share his story. Today's episode is brought to you by Manscaped. Ladies, we all know it's hot girl summer, but what kind of summer is your fella having? If he isn't participating in smooth sack summer, then what is he even doing? When you're out playing in the summer sun, make sure he's scaped down there. That's right, this is the summer to keep his boys cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leader in below-the-waist grooming is making sure we all have a ball this summer by giving our pantsed partners everything they need to stay fresh. So dive headfirst into smooth sack summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the code PNG. The Performance Package 4.0 comes with everything needed to prepare that summer bod. It comes with the Lawnmower 4.0. You want to know the great thing about this trimmer? You both can use it. You ever hear of those couples who are together so long that they start dressing the same? Same idea. Trimmed twinsies. I like it. Y'all are so romantic. It was meant to be. The Performance Package also comes with the Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer, the Crop Preserver deodorant, Crop Reviver toner. I really missed out on an opportunity here with the Crop Circle episodes. The Performance Boxer Briefs, and a cool travel case that holds all them goodies. So give him the gift of looking, feeling, and smelling great. And get 20% off plus free shipping with the code PNG at manscaped.com. That is 20% off plus free shipping with the code PNG at manscaped.com. Having the right tools for grooming is essential. Do yourself and your man a favor. Help him upgrade his self-care. My guest is the author of Dead Watching, which is a true story of personal encounters with the supernatural. Since childhood, Robbie Daniels has understood that we are never truly alone. At times odd, scary, inexplicable, and often dark, his tale begins at an early age and culminates in his family's experience sharing their home of over 10 years with paranormal entities. So check beneath your bed, shut the closet door, secure all feet beneath the safety of your blanket, and please enjoy my conversation with Robbie Daniels.
I live in the Pacific Northwest now, and I moved here 3 years ago in 2020 for a position at the hospital. I work at Colfax Whitman Hospital and Medical Clinics, and brought my family, tagged my family along. Two of my children were still in the home, and they wanted to come with us, so we brought them to it. I say that because I'm a stepfather, but they wanted to stay with their family, and so we brought those kids with us, my wife and I, and both have since found their mates, so it's really funny. One of them is married, and one of them will be married next month. So we really was a positive for us moving to the Pacific Northwest. We live in Washington. I am a 57-year-old author, authored 2 books. So Dead Watching is the reality book. It's everything, and I always tell folks that buy the book, it's 100% real. Everything in the book is real, and it works out really well because some of the people that read the book, I've had a couple people that have read the book and have had to stop reading the book. So it's funny how some people don't buy in as much until they really see the fantasy turn into real life. I do have another book. I started in 2007 when I was attaining my bachelor's degree, and wrote a zombie book before zombies ever became a thing. It's called Them, and that's out there also. But dead watching is a true real deal, and so it's really cool. And one of the things about me is I I don't pull any punches. So I did put in the book a disclaimer: if you have a problem reading scary stuff or things that are real, stay away from the book.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? What you said there, for anyone not familiar with, how drastic paranormal experiences can go, it can be very difficult to believe some of these stories because, I mean, I do because I've been there. Um, but some of these are just they're straight out of a horror film. Some of these are truly scary. And you're still with us, so that's good. Good
All right.
sign. So, well, let's get right into it because we are ultimately going to talk about a big section of this book has to do with your family living in a particular home for over 10 years. And the question that you ask in the book and that you say that other people have asked you frequently is, why did you stay? So we're going to lead up to that, give our listeners a little teaser. Before that, though, we've got a lot to cover. Would you just go ahead and give us a little taste of what you were experiencing from childhood? What kind of experiences did you have?
Okay. In the book, I added the experiences. I had a couple of experiences that were pretty traumatic. And I actually had to ask my brother to make sure that maybe I didn't just dream some of those things, because as you live these kind of things, some of those things you have nightmares and you have things like that. But my father and my brother, we both started experiencing stuff at a young age, um, and we still talk about those things today. My father was an avid hunter, and we would go and camp out overnight in different areas. But there's a portion in the book that I really start off with the scary part, in Crooked Creek Cemetery, and that part of the book is where we would go camping, and my father would take us kids, and he'd go do things. And this particular night, I don't know, and it relates well to the Pacific Northwest, because I don't know if it was a Bigfoot creature or to this day what that creature was. But we were camping in a tent, and I literally woke up. I'm an asthmatic, and which is why I moved to the Pacific Northwest. And I woke up with something startling me. I have had an asthma attack, and I was using my medicine, and something walked down the hill. We're at Crooked Creek Cemetery, which is about 5 to 6 miles out of town, in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's really the scariest place. If I wouldn't go today for anything, there's no way. And I've driven by that place. It's in Paris, Tennessee, but or Big Sandy, Tennessee, which is close to Paris. But I've driven by that area a couple of times since, and I would never even go down the road. That's how scary that area is. But it's a really old cemetery. And then you go down to the lake. You take about a quarter of a mile drive straight down. You have to have a 4-wheel drive to go down. But it's in an area no one would be out there walking, hunting, anything. So this creature, whatever it was, woke me up in the middle of the night and stared dead at me with glowing eyes. So I was so scared. The kids were in the tent with me, but nobody woke up because I was obviously the only one awake looking for my medicine at that point. It looked at me in the old days, and those were about, I'm going to say the early or late 70s. I think late 70s probably is where it was. But they, those tents had roll up mosquito windows. And for
Mhm.
older viewers, they'll realize that those are something. But it was face to face, and I'm going to say within a couple feet from me. I couldn't make it out because I was still half asleep. But it watched me for about 10 seconds, maybe a little shorter, and it turned around and walked back up the hill. And so what I mean by that, it just went out of the middle of nowhere. It had to be a tall creature. I was laying on a cot, an army cot, and I had won that night. We had all had a drawing to see who would win to sleep on the cot. The rest of the kids had to sleep on the floor, and there was about 4 kids there, and I won. But did I really win? Because I was face to face with this creature. So anyway, that was the initial start of the I guess the terror things that had happened in my life. And then the next one, these are the couple events that I want to talk about before the book that really set me in motion to believe in the occult or the supernatural or whatever this is. But we lived in a home. My mother and father had separated, and they finally divorced. But we lived in this home, and we were painting my room at one night. It was a 3-bedroom house. My dad had one room, and then my brother and I, we were actually sleeping in the same bed, which was really weird. We were young, but we were sleeping in the same bed because I had to have my room that was being fumigated and painted. And so we all remember this as vividly as possible. My father had come up on him in the middle of the night, and I can only tell you in the book the things that he described to us at that point, and to this day we could tell you the same story, all three of us, letting you know that it's real deal. But we had a couple things in this house that happened over the few years there. This wasn't the same house, but here's the funny part: this house is in the same neighborhood as the home that I talk about in Dead Watching. So really incredible. But we only heard, we never saw the creature, but my dad woke up in the middle of the night. He woke up after we heard, and his name was Bob, and we heard something, a creature or something from, and I heard it before my brother. It woke him up after me, but it literally said Bob, and it was the deepest bass voice you've ever heard in your entire life. It was scary, and it said it a couple of times. Then I heard my dad breach his shotgun. So I knew that at that point so we felt like somebody was in the house, to be honest with you. My dad gets up and comes and opens the door and says, "Boys, did you see anything or hear anything?" And of course, we both at that point jumped up because we both had heard what he had heard. He went through the house. My dad is a big man. I've never known him to be scared of anything in my life. And to watch him be frantically searching through the house to try to find something and make sure all the doors and windows were locked.
Yeah, really with his shotgun.
That scares me more than anything, because that lets you know something was real and it was in our house that night. My dad, a few days later, I think it was a few days later, I can't remember the exact time period, but had a almost crash and almost got killed. He feels like something was warning him. But to this point, that's all we know. Now, I never saw anything. My brother and I were my dad gave us a 22 rifle beside the bed for the rest of the night, but there was no sleep that night. So that's the lead in of things that I feel like I've always had attachment or something in my life that maybe led up to where I'm at with Dead Watching.
Yeah. What a way to start out the book too, with these specific stories. Let's go back to the creature in the woods one. This voice one, for whatever reason, this one freaked me out. It's interesting because it is one of those paranormal shared experiences, and in that it is undeniable that it happened.
Yep.
And you can be skeptical all you want, but there was nobody there. There was nobody there. It was a voice, a faceless voice. Yep. And your father, who couldn't be scared of anything, was frightened. Yep. And you boys heard it, of course. This the creature in the woods, you just said you didn't get a good look at the face, but you saw these eyes
only. I remember it to this day. The eye, I didn't see anything. I heard the crunching of leaves. If you're a hunter, then you know when deer are coming up, things like that. I hunted in my youth, but I could hear it crunching the leaves coming down the hill. But I was half asleep. I could hear my dad. He had a new girlfriend at the time. I could hear them. They had put the tent up off the lake area, and he was down near the water. So they were down there probably frolicking, having, just enjoying their time. But the kids were all in the tent asleep. And so when this thing come down, it literally came around the tent. It knew the tent was there. It probably knew something was odd about the tent being there, because it was, something he wasn't familiar with, or she, whatever it was. But it stood face to face with me. And again, I only saw the eyes. My eyes were blurry. I couldn't see anything. That was pitch dark. You're in the middle of an area that's an embankment that's lower than, it's probably below the plane of the earth, literally being in a dark area. But you couldn't see anything, but I saw the eyes.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
and then I watched it turn and walk off.
Okay, so you would say they were illuminated. They were literally glowing.
Yeah, that was the weird part, because I could only see eyes, but I could see the eyes, and it was a color, let's say green or red. I can't remember which color the eyes are at this point, but they looked dead at me.
Okay.
We were just not even maybe feet, maybe inches.
Yeah. Okay. And the walking sound, the crunching of the leaves. I mean, would you guess that it was bipedal? Was it a bipedal sound?
It was 2 feet walking. It wasn't 4
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah.
You could tell it was one person or whatever it was walking up the hill. And I followed the sounds in terror. I did holler for my dad, and my dad said, "Go back to sleep." So he wasn't, and I didn't tell him at that point what I was watching or what I was hearing. But
Mhm.
I think I made it walk off when I screamed for my dad. So that was a scary part. We were below a mountain or a hill, I guess, and you could hear it as it walked off and walked back up the hill away from the tent.
Wow. Wow. Have you have you looked into that area at all as far as like other people's experiences with,
I didn't think anything about it. I was a kid. And,
you know,
and at this point, as I got older, I've had so many experiences that I just feel like there's things out there we don't know. And, that it really, whatever it was at that point, I don't know if it was demonic or anything like that of the things that have hit me in future events. But I do know that it was something that was there watching me. And it had its zone on me, and maybe because I was the only one that was high enough laying on the cot. When I sat up on that cot, I was almost face to face with it.
oh my gosh, I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't know what I would do. I would be screaming for for somebody to. We all like to think we'd be brave in those situations, but
sure. Well,
yeah.
we see those movies that people have tents and they see a shadow and they go, screaming. I think that happened to me, and so I was too sleepy to really do or think anything other than holler for my dad, scream for my dad. But it was terrifying at that point because I went lay back down and I literally was trying to go to sleep and thinking, okay, and you try to think, okay, that was probably just a hunter, or something like that. But there was no way anyone that would be at Crooked Creek Cemetery. And if anybody's near the Big Sandy or Paris, they're going to say, yeah, I would never go in that area. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
that's pretty
Okay.
freaky because all the tombstones most don't even have writings. I remember me and my brother and other kids, playing on the cemetery tombstones and things like that. And I always thought maybe that could have started my whole career, career problems.
Okay. Okay. Like it had like an energetic imprint on you, you think?
I've thought that. We talked about, my brother and I talked about this about a year ago. We talked about, yeah, maybe you hear no walk on the dead and pay respect to the dead. And we were kids. We didn't know any better. But I remember that one point, and that was right down the hill before we went to bed that night. We were, having a big time. So, there's always an opportunity there for something to step in.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, how old were you when that
At
took
that
place?
point, about 11 or 12.
11 or 12. Okay. All right. Very early on. So from that point forward, what other kinds of like what clued you into, oh, maybe something, started in those early years? What's following you?
So the next year, and to this day, I'll say this probably through the whole podcast. I literally have a hard time sleeping at night because we still don't know that it hadn't followed me. But every time you hear a crick or a pop or a snap, it wakes you in the middle of the night. But the next real event was the event with where my dad and we got scared that night. There were things happening at that house where if I was the only one there, I would sit out on the curb until one of the family members got home, and I can't really describe the feeling other than the fact that I just had this feeling: don't stay in the house.
Hmm.
And this was the same house that my dad, in the same neighborhood that the dead watching house is. But that night that happened to my dad, he thinks something was trying to warn him that he was going to have that accident. I don't know, but that was the only really event. Now, remember we left our hamster one night. My dad and mother, right before she moved out, I remember them going to watch, and this will give you a really good timestamp. But they went and watched what's the movie with the Exorcist. So
Uh-huh.
I remember them going to watch that. We want to go, and they were like, "No, you can't go." And I remember them coming back, and we had a hamster in a cage. And that hamster, it was real cold one night. I have no idea. I only remember this as a child because I probably was 9 or 10 at this point. But the hamster had burned up. When they got home, the hamster was cooked fried. They had a heater for it, but it wasn't close enough. And I remember them talking about it and staying away. So that was really weird that happened on the same night that they got home from The Exorcist. We
Hmm.
weren't at the house. We were babysitters. They came and got us and brought us back. And then we literally, our hamster was dead. And we were, they didn't really share a lot of information other than the heater may have been too close. But that's
Yeah.
really a weird thing. I don't think I put that in the book, but that was a really weird
It
event.
it was in the book, and
Oh, okay.
and it was interesting too because I think it was your father in that story that like they'd been talking about it or like worried about it, like and kind of went home real quick to like, oh, like they had
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
known that, oh, something's wrong or something
Yeah.
might be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then there's a really fascinating story that you get into. Kind of the next big creature encounter. And this took place once you moved out of your childhood home. Is that right?
Yes. So I'm going to say this was of all events. Now, the Dead Watching book had numerous events, and we'll talk about several of those. But my father and I moved out, moved my father to Mansfield, Tennessee, when he and my mother divorced. A couple years later, he'd had the accident. We sold the house, and my dad bought a house in Mansfield, Tennessee, which is close to Paris. And I literally, in that area, I was in my teen years, so I think I was a freshman in high school. We moved there, and had a lot of stuff that happened in that house. Again, things that followed me. I don't know. There were several little small events that happened, but the biggest events happening in that area were, some scary stuff, where the porch situation, where I had to walk through the creatures that were standing on the porch. To this day, I don't know what that was.
Mhm.
I literally know I was by myself that night, but I wasn't. I don't know if I was scared enough to where I walked through, but I had to part them to go through. I remember it was just shadowy figures all across the front of the porch, and we had a deck, and so that was pretty scary. I had to go in my bedroom that night, and I watched the ceiling fan until I fell asleep. But I mean, of course, having the few things before that led up to it, but pretty terrifying at that point also.
Yeah, those figures, those you would call them shadow figures?
Shadow figures has been the best. I had not seen anything like that, and still that time had not seen anything. But 10 to 12 probably across the whole porch. It looked like they were standing side by side watching me. And my buddy, we had been out driving, and I got home late that morning, and my dad, nobody was there. I get off, and it was on like a Friday or Saturday night. Get up early morning, and get ready to walk through and see him standing there, and basically just stop and stare and trying to figure out, is that people I know? Is it, what is it? So I had to go through them. So that was kind of
Mhm.
scary.
Mhm.
They, I don't even remember if they partied or I pushed through or whatever. Went straight to my bedroom. So
Okay.
pretty
Okay.
scary.
Okay. Okay. And then following that is, I don't want to jump ahead because there's so
Okay.
many
Yeah.
instances, and we won't cover them all because we want to leave some for the listeners, some juicy bits.
Sure.
But following that, after you left home, you found your independence. You're like, I'm done.
Yep. So yeah, this was the scariest of probably everything in the book. Again, this was a precursor to Dead Watching, but I moved in with my mother. I called my mother, and I really living in Mansfield, Tennessee. It was about 30 miles. A school bus had to come get us at 5 in the morning. That's how far away from school we were.
Hmm.
So I wanted to move back to my hometown of Dyersburg, Tennessee. And so I literally that called my mother and said, "Hey, I'd like to move in with you." And I didn't know how it was going to be because she had moved away and gotten remarried. My stepfather, whom I adore now, he has passed away, but one of the most beneficial people that have ever been in my life. He said, "Yeah." And so I moved in with them about 16, 17 years old. Still in high school, so it was. I think I was a senior at that time, and moved in. And we had gotten in. I was kind of a little party animal at that point. I moved in with them and kind of got a little crazy. Some people get to those parts in their life and got the wrong crew I was running around with, and just was enjoying life. And I came home one night, and my mother, I had been drinking as a kid, does stupid things, and she wasn't happy with me, and so. That night I stormed away and wanted to be the man and leave. I was working at a job at that point, and I said, you know what, I'm man enough to move out. And I moved out, and I slept in a parking lot, actually a school parking lot that night. And the next day I went to work and was talking, and this is in the book in detail, but was talking basically to a friend of mine. And he said, "Hey, there's a apartment complex I live in. It's a boys' home, and it's only boys that live there. And the lady's really strict, but it is something, she may have something open." But he made the disclaimer, and I really started to learn to listen to people a little more at that point when he told me, "Do not go to the top floor. Do not go in the attic space. If she has rooms up there, don't go. I didn't listen. I was the big bad son that just was ready to take on the world. So that day I got off work, went and saw the lady, and she said, "Oh, I do have one," and it was on the top. Of course, it was on the top floor. The only thing she had, rules were couldn't have girls over. I had to be careful when I had to be dressed if I came down to take a shower. And then there was, she did tell me that there was a roommate I would have, but he would never be there. So I had the whole top floor to myself. It was a truck driver. And he would sleep on one side of the room and I would sleep on the other. And of course, again, I didn't care. I had a bed and had a dresser. And so it was pretty exciting for me to be able to pack up my bag, one of the few things I grabbed when I left, and start my living my life. The pretty exciting part is the part of the book that people will love. I lived there one day, so that'll tell you a lot about the book.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a turn and burn type living situation. Yeah.
So what did you think about the event that happened there? I mean, did you?
Oh, it's one of those high strangeness events that you just kind of have to take it at its word because it's just so strange. And I don't think I've heard any other stories quite like that. Like it's a very specific entity or creature that you encountered. And like I said, this is one of those stories that's like straight out of a horror film. It's what you imagine in your worst nightmares.
Yeah.
So I was just like, I was probably reading it like like just mouth open. Like,
so this boarding house was across from a cemetery. I'm sorry, across from a funeral home. So, I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Things that bothered me, it was a different event because it was a creature instead of a person, or they're all creatures, I guess. But this one, waking up to that morning, that was pretty terrifying. And then to go to the mirror and see what I saw, that was pretty crazy. And getting to work and then people talking to me about that, I will never forget that day because all the cuts. I'll leave the listeners hanging there, but all the cuts said that night let me know to move out.
Yeah, it banged you up pretty good, whatever it was.
Yeah, I was done with that place. I thought I would leave that to somebody else. But there's
Yeah.
probably a reason that was open all the time and that guy didn't show up and live there.
Right. Yeah, you never met your roommate.
Nope.
Well, what do you think for yourself about that situation? Like, have you thought back on it and thought, well, maybe it was like a very visceral dream and then I scratched myself on something, or do you think back on it like, no, I know what happened. This happened.
Great question. At this period, with things that have happened to me, it always stayed in my mind. Could have been a dream, but what happened to my mouth?
Right.
How can you dream that happened to your mouth and then when I wake up and go to work? So I was still half asleep at that job, which was a pretty crazy job. I mentioned in the book, I believe I mentioned in the book that my first job as an adult was making grenades for the government. So that was a grenade job, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So my mind was in disarray at that point. I was always tired. Of course, that night I had been really, really tired and didn't get much sleep. But to have the wounds on my mouth, it couldn't be a dream when you see that. When I get to work and everybody sees the cuts on my mouth, that was pretty devastating. And I didn't share that event with anybody other than the guy that knew. And then he said, "You moved in up there, didn't you?" He didn't know. I couldn't wait to get there the next day to tell him, "Hey, I'm your roommate," and he knew. So that lets me know that there's something there. He warned me. He warned me before that, and so I deserve what I got.
Oh, wow. Oh, your dreams of independence were dashed very quickly. And what a way to do it too. All right. Well, you know what? I don't want to give any more away of those early stories. My listeners need to pick up a copy of the book to see those for themselves. But I think that there lays a very good foundation and gives the audience this understanding that this is stuff, it's extreme stuff that has happened throughout your life. So that lays the foundation to get into the house. Let's talk about the kinds of events that were taking place in this house and the 10-year span of time that you and your family put up with this.
Okay. Yeah, my wife, I wanted to be with us on the podcast because she can share some things. There's so many. The book is full of things that happened at this house. Um, when we bought the home, I watched this home being built. So a lot of people say, well, was it a scary home? Was it dark? Was it, damp looking? It was a normal home. And I'm going to say a ranch style home because that's kind of what it is. But the home wasn't in any way scary at any point. When we bought the home, I played wiffle ball as a child. I told you we lived in that same neighborhood with kids before that home was built. It was built early '70s, and so nothing scary would make you think it had anything wrong with the home we moved in. It had what looked like it had a long driveway, but it looked like the basement area, and I'm going to call it the basement area because that's what we call it. But it looked like maybe a carport that was made into a living structure. And
Okay.
so it had features in there. Now, my wife at that time smoked. It had a little room at the very front that she would go in and smoke. And I have an asthmatic. She did well enough to stay away from me, and she would go in that room, and we had a vent in that room to where she couldn't, she could stay in that room. But it was connected to this basement area. It was really a really nice area. We had a small freezer in there, and we had a computer desk and computer, and basically we kept just overflow stuff in that room. But later on down the line, we really feel like that's where this thing lived or stayed or resonated. Um, and
Okay, this den kind of living area, or this was the den.
Well, it was a living area for my mother-in-law. We'll get to that part shortly.
Okay.
We moved her in, and that was big enough for her to make a living area. So it was a pretty good sized den. We just used it again for overflow, and we had a big rack of things that we took down and that just to keep the house from getting cluttery. But it was also connected to my oldest son's room, and he was 10 at the time we moved in. He's 28 now, so it tells you, gives you a good time frame there also. But I'll tell some stories about him. Um, Things happened to him. He was not the child to say, "Oh my God, I'm scared," or something's freaking me out. He would never do that. He was really a docile child, one of the quietest children you'd ever meet. But when things started happening, we didn't tell the kids. At first, we weren't sure what was happening. Things would scratch on the roof. There was no tree above the roof, but things would scratch on the roof. Things would knock. Things would do just crazy stuff that wasn't anything other than, that's just the wind, or those kind of things at the beginning. And I can't tell you how many years before we really started taking notice. It was a couple, I believe. I think there was a couple years there before we really saw, okay, this is not normal.
Right, right. Isn't that strange how even if you do have these kinds of experiences, the first impulse for most people, I have to guess, and I'm the same exact way, is to try to be skeptical about it, be logical about it, or just kind of brush it aside. Oh, okay, yeah, this is weird, it happened, but brush it aside until you're years into an experience, and you finally look back and think, boy, that there was some strange stuff going on there, that like it was a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
and when you can finally conceptualize that, put it all together. Yeah, I have a haunted home in my childhood as well that I didn't realize for decades later. And when I could look back and say, wow, that was far stranger than anywhere else that I ever lived. There was obviously something taking place there.
Yeah, we wrote it off. We didn't, even the things in my childhood with when Carrie and I got married, we didn't think anything about them, other than just, believe what happened today, or this sounded so weird, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And then once they get to a head, though, they things that you really can't explain, then it becomes, challenged at that point.
Yeah, because things started happening to you and your family members that could not be ignored.
Yep.
Right.
Um,
Did you?
and dead watching, I know I had my things in my childhood, but my father-in-law, so he has since passed, Brother Billy Markle. He's Carrie's father, and great guy. We loved him to death. And he would tell us things. He'd say, as a pastor, he'd say, something's wrong, or you have some things going on. And they would come over and play cards with us and things. And he would always have this really weird feeling. Wasn't scared because he was, God's creature. So he knew that, God was always protecting he and us. We're Christians. But we were watching, Carrie and I made the really big mistake. And to this day, we don't watch anything that has spirit, anything demon, anything that's, we just don't watch scary movies anymore. And it was because my father-in-law looked at me one day and he said, "Robbie, son, I want to tell you something." He said, um, you need to quit watching that show you're watching because you're going to bring something in your home. And so
Oh,
we laughed it off. We thought it was kind of, well, he's just trying to protect us or scare us. And he was always extravagant anyway. But we feel like what we did, we were watching a show called Paranormal State. Loved it. It was about some Penn
Hmm.
State students that would go around
Yeah,
and
it's a great
and they
show.
and they would find orbs. But they want that we watched this one show, and after this one part was when things really started going crazy. They had a show called 666, and it was really, if anybody wants, I don't recommend anybody watching. I'm going to promote that because even though it's a great show to us, we liked it. That was when things started happening. And people say don't bring a Ouija board in your house. It was that kind of effect on us. And so
Okay.
once that happened, my father-in-law said, you've invited something in, and now you've got to contend with it.
Okay. Do you think that everybody would fall under that kind of general rule, or do you think things like that affect people more than others? Like if I watch a scary movie, I don't necessarily think I'm attracting anything, it's an enjoyment thing, blah blah blah. But in your case, like you specifically saw things take a turn
Yeah.
when as you were watching the show.
I don't think people need to mess with the occult in any way.
Hmm.
Of any shows I've watched, I've watched some biography channels, things like that. I've seen things that it shows the same thing happen to them. So I do know that there's, you open up that door.
Mm.
If you do that kind of thing, expect something to happen. Some people, and especially nowadays, which will let you know that we're close. I feel like we're at the end of times. I think things have gone really awry. I think Satan has taken over the world. I think things are going crazy. If you look around at any social media site now, you'll see all the dancers, all the comedians, all the actors. Those guys, they have this special thing that think that connection. And think I know it's out there. That's why we stay away from it now.
Mm.
Um, we're watching these things happen. I don't know if you ever watched the show, and I watched it again yesterday, which is really funny. But you remember the show with Roddy Piper called They Live from the '70s? Did you ever watch the show?
No, huh?
So you've got to watch the show. One of my favorite B movies of all time, maybe even close to a C. But Roddy Piper was a wrestler back in the '70s. My grandfather, I loved him. He loved Roddy Piper, and I love him too. And I'm not a wrestling fan, but I was at that point. But he has a show. There's a show called They Live. Again, it's got some famous people in the movie, but it's so B movie, but it's so good. But what it tells is shows creatures, aliens or whatever, and you can only see them with these glasses that these people invented. So there's things around us that we don't know. The signs up on the show say obey, listen, watch more of this, things like that. And when you put the glasses on, you could see the signs and you could see the people's real faces that were, creatures. But I really feel like in my life, it's kind of close to that. That may not be, a lot of times we see movies that are so close to, hey, that happened. You know,
Hmm.
that this really could be that movie, those kind of things. And I feel like those will make we won't watch anything anymore like that because we haven't had anything follow us in the last, I'm going to say, 5 to 8 years. We moved to Washington. We never had anything follow us here, but creaks and packs and pops on the floor and people come in the door. They startle us every minute, so we brought it in. My father-in-law said we did, and I felt like he was right. And he was a man of God, so who am I to say maybe he didn't know what he's talking about? But I really feel like after watching that one episode, things took a turn for the worst.
Okay. Okay. You answered a question I was thinking about asking. I wanted to know, since you guys left this home, if anything had continued, if the activity had ceased, and it sounds like yes, it has
And
ceased for the
we
most
have
part.
we have pops. We have things happen. Our house has when winds come up in the Pacific Northwest, which they do often. We have something upstairs that I haven't went up there to look for, but
Mhm.
there's some popping upstairs. But I'm almost 100% sure that's the wind. But we haven't looked. We write it off. My wife sleeps every night with earphones in her ear. She has music or something playing in her ear every night, and I had to buy her some new ones the other day because she said I cannot sleep at night. So we still bring this stuff with us, but I don't think it followed us. Maybe we joke about the fact we moved so far away now it didn't have any way to get here, but I think that there's always a portal somewhere, but we're not letting it in or giving it an opportunity. Let's say that.
Yeah, yeah. With that, on that note, like opening the door, and that might be something different for everybody. I mean, who knows? But I certainly know a lot of people who feel that way about the Ouija board specifically, that opens some kind of doorway, some portal, gives permission for the stuff to come right in.
Yeah,
So,
there,
yeah,
there
I
is
understand.
there's not enough money to pay my wife or I to put a Ouija board in our house. When you've experienced these things, you know it exists, and
Yeah.
people joke about it. I remember people telling me, we had a couple friends, and they were like, "Let me come over and do a séance in your house," or we didn't do that. And I put in my book, we watched that Paranormal State, and they told us how to get rid of that. I don't know if you remember that part of the chapter, but they told us what to do to get rid of this entity in that house, and that caused a big problem. So we didn't follow any further
Oh,
at
right.
that
Yeah,
point.
yeah. You took the advice from the show and tried, and then it got way worse.
So don't take the advice of some kids in a college telling you how to get rid of a spirit in your house. So
Well, at that point, and we can talk about maybe another story too before we wrap, so to give my audience a bit more insight into the house. But at that point, things had gotten really bad. Like I think at that point, you had been physically assaulted. We'll call it that. Why didn't you call in a priest?
well, that was the question people asked.
Hmm.
But if we knew, if Penn State people, if those kids, and I say kids, they were grown teenagers, if we did that and we made it so angry by just telling it to get out, if we made it so angry, what if we brought a priest and it didn't work? Because it was at that point, Carrie and I would be having adult relations, and it literally a couple times took me by my ankles and jerked me off the bed. So once you have something physically doing those kind of things, do you really want to take a chance? Because a priest's going to come and they're going to leave, and then we're by ourselves. And I thought about that. At that point, it had calmed down a little bit, and we had learned to coexist with whatever that was. But we were just terrified that what if we did do this and brought somebody in and they made it worse?
Yeah, yeah. That's it's a valid fear. It's a valid concern. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when you could see how bad it could get.
Yeah, it got worse when we tried to make it leave. What to tell it. The paranormal state people they said, well, if you got this entity, if you're firm and let them know they're supposed to go to the light, go back, go across and transition, that they haven't done that. If you'll tell them that, they must leave. Well, that's not true.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end. I'd love, would you share with us just one more story from the house, just something that's really memorable, and we'll leave it on that story.
Okay, perfect. I'll share the story of my mother-in-law. We talked about our den area. We moved my mother-in-law in. She was having some money struggles, being older, and we needed to help her out. So we thought we were doing her a favor. At this point, was early on. We didn't realize. I think at that point we weren't. I don't remember where exactly we were in the story, but it wasn't. It was in the beginning. We moved her in the den where this thing was. And now, and let me also say that there was not just a demon. We do know one was demonic. There was no doubt in our mind. But we also had a spirit in the home of a little girl. And you read the book and have people read the book, because that part's really fun. There's some fun things in there also. It played with my daughter. She was 2 and 3 at the time. So there was some things also, the little spirit, the little girl. But the demon part was really terrifying when we brought my mother in. I gave her a recliner. We put her TV downstairs. This was the same room my computer existed. We moved my computer upstairs, and we put her bed in. And slowly and surely, she started changing. Um, she just started getting to the point where something was taking over her body. And my father-in-law, her ex-husband, he literally told me, he said, he was on the phone with her, and he said, Robbie, your mom is possessed. I know at this point she's possessed. And we kind of knew already also. But to give the readers a couple of scary stories, she will tell you today she never lived with us. She doesn't remember the idea of the situation at all. Um, but she would come up to dinner, and we cooked dinner every night. And she'd come up to dinner, and we'd sit at the table, and she would walk up the 4 or 5 steps to get to the house area and to the table, and walk real feeble and slow. Her eyes would always be real dark. She'd sit down, and many, many, many times she would start choking with her head back, like she was needed the Heimlich maneuver. I literally got up behind her several times, and she would look and growl at us, and pretty scary. At that point, something's not right. And then I don't know if you want me to share the whole story, but the parts where she had to go to the hospital,
Hmm.
I'll share this part really quick. Carrie calls. She says, "You got to come home." She's crying. She's screaming. My mother-in-law's in the den. Her feet are turned in. She called me and said, Robbie, I said, call 911. I'm on my way. I was only a couple minutes from home, and I like to, had a wreck getting home. I get home and she's laying back in the recliner. Her feet are just twisted inside. Her hands are turned where I don't know how they could even bend that far. Her eyes are rolled back to whites. Basically, you see no pupils. And she's foaming at the mouth, and she's sitting there shaking. And so I'm grabbing her and the ambulance came in right behind me. Luckily, I had about 20, 30 seconds, less than a minute before they came in the door behind her, and they took her off. But it was the most scary. I was trying to shake her, wake her, and it didn't know what was going on. Again, it could be anything. People say, well, that could be anything. It could. But there's more things that happened to this event. They come get her. They take her to the emergency room. They put her in ICU. She's unresponsive. She's comatose. She's comatose, and I can't remember how long. I say a couple weeks, but I'm not sure exactly how long it was. But she was on Medicaid. And so they told the hospital, if she can't stay on there, we're going to have to pull her off there. She was on life support at that point. They had the family get ready. They said, bring the family in because, we're going to have to pull her off the ventilator. And so I remember this. I didn't want to be in the room. It was such a small room, and she was still in ICU. The family gathered around the bed. She's sitting there. My wife and I was sitting there all holding hands and getting ready to take her off. And she goes, what are y'all doing here? Oh. And so pretty scary when things like that happen. And my wife can tell you the same story. I haven't remembered my book. I haven't written anything in my book in, many years when I wrote this thing. But I can tell you today how vivid it was in my mind and because we saw it. When you live it, you're never going to forget it. We didn't move her back in. We found her a place. And to this day, I'll tell listeners, we have a recording of just about a month ago. I let some people listen to it in the past, but we still think that it's connected to her now. So.
Okay. What's the recording?
So you didn't get to hear that. Amy at the post office, you can ask her. So I let Amy listen to the recording of my wife talking to her one day. So my wife's sister calls and says, Mom is acting really funny. You gotta talk to her. And so we call her and we recorded the conversation because it was so eerie. But she literally now, on occasion, starts, if you let her drift off and not talk to her, if she's not talking, she'll start doing incoherent speech. I guess that's the best way to say it. So scary as maybe that you hear people talking in tongues, that's what you hear. And I've got it on a recording and I played it. If you ever get a chance to listen to that, I can play it for you. But you may not want to hear it though, because it will set a tone in your mind. But people I've heard, if I've told them this story and they've read my book, they won't listen to this. But this part will really, it'll concrete evidence that something's wrong and something happened. And this really was a true story.
Okay. You ever thought about putting that up online with like a link, a scannable link in the book, and then people can be brave if they want to hear it?
So you're the first one, and we talked earlier, you're the first one that's done anything with this book. We haven't went out there. My publisher did get a request for me and did send me an email one day and said that somebody was looking at making a movie about this because it's pretty interesting. I can't see, there's a lot of movies out there that are a lot less intriguing than what's happening in my story. But we haven't, and there's a reason I haven't done a lot. Push this out there. Carrie and I talked. She never said anything about it, but we felt like there was a little situation where maybe I didn't ask her permission to put her mom in the book, and I always got scared that since I didn't use her name, but I always got scared that maybe if I do too much with her mom, am I going over that line of family, trust? And so,
sure.
So I've done this. I've let people hear it. I don't say her name, and they don't know anything about my mother-in-law. But but the fact that I have it and I haven't got rid of it, it's definitely a cool thing to have.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely just something to kind of corroborate your experiences too in those times. How is your mother-in-law now? Did she get better after leaving? Was it
she's always we feel like she's always had something attached to her. She's had a rough life. She's older. But she's had rough experiences. Now, we don't keep up with anything other than the fact of what we know about. But we now live in Washington, which is 2,200 miles away from her, so we don't spend a lot of time with her. But there are those, every once in a while, there's those moments that we had the recording. We don't record anymore. That one was enough. Because I went to thinking, are we inviting it back in, by being, doing this? So you just got to be scared, careful that you may bring something back and do something that's going to cause this thing to start all over again, and we couldn't handle that again. I think we're done with that.
Yeah. No, you don't want a repeat of any of this. Just sometimes it's better to just leave well enough alone.
Right.
Well, that was I really appreciate that. Just sharing that with all of us. I know that there is so much more to the story, but that was a really good just kind of peek into everything that you have experienced throughout your life, and definitely this home, which stands out, something very sincerely scary and highly strange was taking place there. But I think that would be a good place to leave off there. Let's go ahead and go into our final segment, final questions, final thoughts, and then we will close it out. All right.
Sounds great.
All right, sir. So, first question, you did kind of answer this a little bit, so I'm gonna tweak it a bit. The question was, well, because most people are not going to experience these types of things at the level that you have throughout your life. So, my question was more so about like, do you think it's attracted to you? Like, are you the common denominator? And I'm going to tweak it to say, because when we talk about, okay, pre-house and then post-house, obviously something very special was taking place in this house, and even on the land. Like, this was in the same neighborhood as you had those other experiences, and yet you are still experiencing these things throughout your life pre-house. So how do you think that works in general? Where do hauntings reside? How do they attach? Do they attach to people? Do they attach to land? Is it the materials of the house? Like what fosters a haunting?
That's a good question, Kristen. I'm not sure if do I think it was attached to me? Yep. Well, I had too many experiences to say that it didn't attach to me in some way. Um, but I think you also invite things in. At that point of all parts of my life, I watched scary stuff. I didn't care about demonic movies were great. I can't, I couldn't get enough of those things. I even remember doing the mirror on the wall as children, as kids, and so we did those a lot. So I think it can happen to anybody. I really do. Do I think I'm a child of God and something special with me? Probably. My son, just in answering that question, when we would take pictures of him, he would have orbs above his head
Hmm.
if he was by himself.
Hmm.
But if he had someone sitting beside him, and we did that test, then no orbs. So something was protecting him, and I don't know if it's in our history, our past. If there's anything crazy, a lot of people say, did you do history and stuff? I really didn't do a lot of stuff because the more I've dug, or the more I felt like I opened the doors, I could open the doors.
Okay.
Do that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next question. What is the main thing that you hope folks take away after hearing your story?
Stay away from anything demonic. If it's not a joke. We took it as a joke. Again, when I was a child, when I was young, I was one of those kids that laughed at it. I thought it was funny. We were Christians. We've always been Christians our life, but not practicing Christians to the point where we knew we could be safe. So I think people that make a joke out of it, people that don't believe in it, people that really chastise it, they don't understand what they're doing. And once you get this thing connected to you, it can use you, and we know that because we saw it. So it's. I just think the best thing I can tell you is people stay away from it. Don't watch these shows. Listen to podcasts like this. Know that it's out there. Don't make it where, this is all. It's not really true, because it is. I would give my life telling people, and every day tell people that this is something you need to watch out for. I think my situation lets us know, okay, there's things like this that are happening around us. So God is real. Because if this were rampant all over the world, our world being chaos. Something has it boxed. But I think if we do like things like I did, watch shows and do things like that, and laugh at it, and provoke it, it can come alive. And it did with my life, and my family.
Okay. All right. And final question for you. If you had to go back to the day that you first moved into that house, what would you have done differently?
Move out. If we had known, it took us, 10 years. People say, and I'm not going to mess the question. If you have a question, that why do we live there? Why do we stay there? We were a one income family. We didn't have the money for another home, and we couldn't sell the home. We ended up literally, and I don't know what the reason was. You can always, make your own endings of why we couldn't sell the home. But it took us about 3 years to sell the home, and we ended up paying somebody $500 to take the home. So that tells you when we went to close on the home, we ended up paying $500 more than the home was worth. So the home was worth a lot more than we sold it for, but we were ready to get out.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, that's fair. I'd want to leave too. Where can my listeners find and follow you, Robbie, and where can they pick up a copy of Dead Watching?
Well, Dead Watching has done really well. It's self-published, but you can find it anywhere now. I've seen it and actually outside the United States. I get a pretty good premium when people buy this book. Obviously it's great for the author to make something, but I get a residual check pretty good now because people are starting to wake up to it. It's something that you'll find interesting. It's not a long book where a lot of people don't like read novels. It's not a novel book, so it's great for those people that like to read and maybe a whole book in one day. But I will tell you this: and I don't have a site to get the book. I really didn't promote it. I wrote the book just to have the memories and let people know if they wanted to go. But you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes and Noble. Anywhere now, eBay has it. The book used to be around $7-8 now. It's up to about 25. Anyway, you sometimes can find it 15 to 20 if you're looking hard. But it only shows, that the higher the cost is when something's selling. So I'm proud of the book. I think it's wonderful. I do have some ways for people to contact me if they want to contact me, and I can give my email address. I feel free for you to share that. I can send them bookmarks, some cool things. So it's cool to have a copy of the book and read it. I'll tell you a really quick thing that we have I never shared this with you, or I don't think I did, but Colfax, lucky me, we moved into a town that has a haunted hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know that. So we have a person that gives guide tours at the hospital, and it's truly a haunted hospital, St. Ignatius, and people can see that online also. But the tour guide bought my book and read 4 or 5 pages and put it down. She to this day has not picked it back up.
So is that Val?
No, that's not Val. That's Jessica.
Oh, okay. I haven't met Jessica. We were just there at the hospital a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
So Jessica is at the hospital, and she bought the book, and she won't read it. But she's a tour guide at the most scariest hospital in the United States. So that tells you something.
Yes, it does. Well, I'm so glad to hear that it's well received, and it sounds like it's getting more and more well received. I'm glad that it's doing well, and that is so exciting to hear that maybe possibly someone's gonna turn it into a cinematic adventure for us at some point.
That'd be great.
That would be awesome. All right, Robbie. Well, to wrap us up, to take us out, would you like to leave us with any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or a piece of advice?
Well, I always say when I sign, if anyone ever, and I just this weekend, I met a gentleman, and he said he'd love to have a book for his grandson, and they needed to bond on some stuff, and he loves scary stories. And I always put on there, I don't hang my feet over the bed at night. I always make sure my closet doors are closed, as you said in the beginning of our podcast. I literally, I'm always watching. And so when I named the book Dead Watching, it's because I'm always watching and always keeping my ears and eyes open, because you never know what's around. Just be sane and try not to make bad decisions by following something or making a joke out of something we don't understand. And I think that's the best advice I can give.
Robbie Daniels, author of Dead Watching, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to my guest, Robbie Daniels, for joining me today, and thank you for sharing your story with my listeners. If you enjoyed today's guest, follow that link in the notes to pick up your very own copy of Dead Watching. Growing up, hearing others' stories of their personal encounters with the paranormal were some of my favorite moments. It's something I still love to this day. And you don't need to sit around a campfire or press a flashlight up under your chin. No. You can do that right here on the Paranormal Girl podcast. Listeners, if you have a story to share, whether it was your encounter with a cryptid or ghostly interactions in haunted homes of your past, or maybe you saw something strange in the sky you can't explain, or something else entirely, and you would like to be considered to be on the show, shoot me a message. paranormgirlpod@gmail.com. It's that easy. Let's chat. I look forward to hearing from you. And if that's not for you, that's okay. You can still stay in touch and keep up with the goings on over here at Paranormal Girl Pod on all socials. Check out the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. You may be unaware that I produce video versions of these episodes, and I post them up over there so you can actually witness the face that owns this voice. Lucky you, I know. Patreon.com/ParanormGirlPod is where you will find backstage guest chats, early access to video versions of those episodes, and a lot of random, intriguing, paranormally supportive scientific articles and reports, and really just anything that I find super cool. I'll put it up there, exclusive to the patrons. That is going to be it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I adore y'all. Have a great week, everybody. Until next time, stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.